Welcome everyone. My name is Richard Orme and we're delighted to have you join us today for another webinar hosted by the DAISY Consortium. As we count down the days until the European Accessibility Act coming into force, we're bringing you this series of webinars to help you prepare. This week, to coincide with the European Day of Persons with Disabilities, our topic is accessibility in practice. We regularly hear from publishers that whilst work is taking place to implement the accessibility guidelines and best practices, these efforts are somewhat detached from the real-world implications, the practical benefits, and the impact for people with print disabilities. So today we're going to address that, bringing you an incredible panel of presenters. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Thomas, Joachim, and Robin. 3 accessibility experts with lived experience and with practical stories that will help bring accessibility to life. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, so do use the Q&A button in Zoom to submit them. Our panel is open to discuss anything related to accessible reading. There are no questions too basic. If you're thinking of a question, then someone else probably is thinking of it too, so please do send it in. We'll cover as many questions as possible towards the end of the webinar.
Hello, my name is Thomas Kalisch. I'm from Germany. I live in Leipzig, and I'm the director of Library for the Blind and Visually Impaired, DZB Lesen, here in Leipzig. Accessibility to me as a person means a lot because I'm blind by myself. And I'm really happy, and I see a lot of challenges and a lot of potentials in more accessibility in the let's say in the whole society. And the digital change is so many things are very for us as blind persons very, very good. So I can do my bank accounting, I can read newspapers, and now in the future I will read and can have access to multiple ebooks in an appropriate format for me, which I really look forward to it.
Hi, I'm Robin Spinks. I'm Head of Inclusive Design at the Royal National Institute of Blind People, RNIB. Accessibility to me is about the way in which information, products and services are usable and are presented. How can I access those things? Well, how have the principles of inclusive design been employed in said product or service? So I want to know all about that. And I want to test products and services, find a really good way of using them that works for my needs as an individual.
My name is Joachim Folgan, and I'm from Sweden. What does accessibility mean to me? It means that I'm able to participate in society, and I'm also able to gather information, like in books and other things. I have dyslexia, and I also have cerebral palsy. So I use a wheelchair to get around. But mainly when it comes to accessibility and information and books, I need highlighting, I need text to speech, aka read aloud. I also need the ability to put bookmarks and search information in an EPUB, for example. So I need structure. I also need the ability to change fonts and graphic descriptions and such.
during my study time, it was in the middle of the 80s. There was no requirement for universities to provide me with any kind of study materials, and so it was possible for was not possible for me to get access to any materials. My sighted students have access to books and to lectures provided by the professors, and so I had people who read the material to me, and I was working with my Braille typewriter and make some notes for the lessons and so. But this has changed rapidly in the last years, in the last, let's say, 20 years, and it will change more and more in the future.
So I went to school in the 80s, and in the 80s we didn't have that many computers, almost none, and we didn't have the DAISY format. We didn't have text to speech, and we didn't have a lot of other stuff. And so today I use DAISY, or should I say EPUB 3.3, and text to speech daily, I would say. So it has made a huge difference.
To read OHPs, who remembers those, overhead projectors, and then trying to read displays on slides. And it was always a challenge. And I used to get copies of notes. And, fast forward to today, and I'm using electronic magnification devices, some of which I've actually contributed to the design of, to read displays, to assimilate and absorb the information, and to learn in a much more real-time fashion. I'm also listening to audiobooks on a pair of sunglasses, would you believe? Who would have dreamt that 25 years ago? That was the stuff of science fiction. Today it's reality. I'm also downloading content in any location that I wish and consuming it in a form, be that print or audio, or a bit of both, as is often the case. And I'm listening to audio at 1.7 times, because I've worked out that 2 times is too fast, 1.5 times is too slow, but 1.7 for me is bang on. Everybody's needs are different. So when we think about those little anecdotes, there's been nothing short of a transformation in terms of access to reading material. Currently, I'm using multiple reading formats, and I'm also reading from multiple devices. So this afternoon, I've been using my laptop and an external large display. I've also been using my iPad with PDFs. I've been using my Android phone with a facility called Android Reader, which allows me to take any kind of web-based long-form content and change that to suit my reading needs. So I can get the font the way that I want it. I can have the spacing the way that I want it. I can have the foreground and the text color, background and text color exactly set to my preferences. And then I can also dip in and out of audio as and when I choose. So I'm not a full-time screen reader user. I use magnification, I use large text, and I use a bit of narrated audio as well. I'll also sometimes use, an audiobook in like the kind of Audible format. It's about basically being able to have a dynamic portfolio of reading opportunities. That's what kind of makes my day. I don't want to use large text all the time. I don't want to use magnification all the time. I want to dip in and out of large text, bit of magnification, bit of speech, bit of human audio, mix it up, keep it interesting.
I'm using mostly on my workplace personal computer with a Braille display, and on the Windows PC screen reader is running. The screen reader runs the applications to me, helps me to navigate and to interact with the computer. And on the Braille display, I can read the text I am writing, or other, let's say, a spreadsheet or a math equation. So then I read it on the Braille display to have full access to the correct notation and to the data I have to work on. I'm using a braille display in my office and on my workstation, on my personal computer. But I also can use it often, the braille display for my mobile device, for my smartphone. There is a Bluetooth connection, and I can read all information which are on the screen and read it by me to me over the screen reader. I can also read it with fingers on the braille display. There are small displays, small braille displays, which are very easy to move. And for example, if I'm in a meeting, then I don't want to use the screen reader to bother myself or other people with a language output or a speech output. That's why it's often good use in a braille display to making notes or to read what's maybe on the next topic of the agenda of the meeting.
When it comes to dyslexia can show its face in many different ways, but one of them is that letters jump up and down, and you can't follow the lines in the book. And if you can read them, it takes too long. It takes very long to read, and it's not necessarily your reading comprehension might go down because you concentrate so much on reading, so that your reading comprehension goes down too far. So to be able to compensate for that, you need electronic books with text to speech or read out loud, and maybe you'll also need the sentence that is read out loud highlighted so that you can follow in the electronic text. And another thing that's very important when it comes to both dyslexic and visually impaired and blind people is that we want to be able to speed the read out loud or the text to speech up so that we can read faster than what's called normal speed. I, for example, read at least 2 to 2.5, maybe 3 times the speed, and I know blind and low vision people read even faster. So we really want the ability to speed up the text to speech or the read out loud, so that we can consume the books in the same time frame as everybody else, as close to as possible. When it comes to physical disabilities of different kinds, it can have to do with the ability to move your head, for example, or the ability to hold a book in your hands, or manipulate pages in a book. Just because I might have perfect eyesight, and I might have no learning disabilities or dyslexia or whatever, but I might only have a physical disability, but I can still have quite a bit of a struggle to manipulate a physical book. So I actually need the electronic book.
I make good use of ebook reading systems. I'm often using the opportunity to change the font to a font of my preference. Perhaps I'm also changing the spacing. I'm changing the size of the text. regularly changing the text and background colors to dial that in to suit my needs, taking into account that it's not always the same. So during the hours of daylight, I might prefer one particular setup. When it comes to nighttime or dusk, I might prefer a different reading format. And likewise, I might be shifting between large text, magnification, text to speech, or beautiful narrated human audio. So I like to use all of the features and really try and dial in the reading experience to make it as good as you can make it for your own personal needs. And that, to me, that's the joy of reading, is being able to pick great material, but then being able to have it accessible to you as an individual in exactly the form that works for you for that time of day and also for that location. So I might want to sit in the back garden and listen to a book. I might want to put my sunglasses on and listen to the book through the speakers on my sunglasses and dial in the speed exactly as I want it. Nice drink in hand, and the world is great. So it's about customization all the way for me. Yeah, there's been a lot of development on synthetic speech in recent years, and I think opinions can be quite polarized, but I tend to take an approach myself that says that I use a mix of synthetic speech and then also human audio. And I think, if you're enjoying a bestseller book or you're really interested in a particular topic, it's still hard to beat proper human audio. But you know what? It's becoming more difficult to tell if you're listening to a short article. The latest synthetic speech voices provide an incredible experience. And actually, I would encourage anyone to sample great text to speech and keep an open mind, because actually what it's all about is having the largest amount of audio material available to you in a range of formats. Sometimes you might want to listen to text to speech. Sometimes you might want human audio. Depends what it is. Depends what the book is. Whether it's a fiction or non-fiction thing. Maybe it's even an instruction manual or a how-to guide.
So when I grew up, my parents were my best narrators to me. They read a lot of books to me. Later on, my girlfriend was so nice to read books to me, and but I'm a very often, or I'm very heavy user of talking book libraries, and because they have a lot of good narrators and reading books to me. When it comes to the use of screen readers on smartphones, on PCs. So it really it was good for me to use these synthetic speech voices, and for working content or to have fast information, a synthetic speech is very useful and very practical. Nowadays, we see a lot of artificial intelligence generated voices, and and I am personally very astonished about the quality of these stuff. So often you cannot differ from each. It's not, you not realize, is that a synthetic speech or is it a narrated speech? I'm not trusting in narration of a good novel, but this will come in the future. And at the moment, if you want to read some business materials and these kind of things, and synthetic speech generated by artificial intelligence is very, very useful and provides you with a lot of information, which means if I have an ebook in an accessible format, I can use my screen reader or I can use my smartphone and synthetic speech output generator, artificial intelligence generator, to have a good access to the book.
I almost exclusively read, when it comes to books, I exclusively read talking books in DAISY format or EPUB 3.3 format. When it comes to ordinary text in a Word document, for example, I read it with my text-to-speech engine. I don't read audiobooks. I only read DAISY or EPUB 3.3 books, because I need the synchronized text and the audio combined. So plain audiobooks hasn't done it for me so far. The fact that we can synchronize text, video, audio, and whatever else is fantastic. And the fact that we can also incorporate Braille into an EPUB, for example, is just marvelous. And there is a little bit of work still to be done when it comes to electronic Braille, but we'll get there, don't worry. So it's fantastic to get a multimodal book that can be read by everybody.
The two advantages if I use speech output for me. One is to have the navigation on the book. In the early days, audiobooks, it was a long stream of audio information. Nowadays, if I use DAISY or if I use accessible EPUB format, I can navigate through the table of content. I can jump chapter by chapter or section to section, paragraph to paragraph in a book. And this is one really big advantage what I have with I use synthetic speech. The other advantage is if I use very high quality RE AI generated content or AI generated output. So then it's also a good quality, and I cannot distinguish it between original narrated reader and an artificial intelligence generated speech output. When I use hard copy Braille books, big folders of paper, so they are very big. And for example, if I'm traveling and then I'm not happy to travel too much paper with me, and let's say a novel like Harry Potter has 3 or 5 volumes, and which is very heavy, and that's why it's a very good advantage of a digital book that I have on my mobile device, and I can read it with my small. It's like a chocolate box. The Braille display is not larger than a chocolate box, and I can read it on this display. But I have to say, I need two things. I need both. I need to have a nice on paper produced Braille book is for leisure reading. I'm sitting on my couch at home, and I need also the mobile version. And so it's the advantage of the mobile version is also I can move it, and it's also I can have more books than I can ever produce in Braille on paper if I have access to the full catalog of digital talking books in a digital way that I can read on a Braille display.
Lots of us really enjoy reading, but there comes a point sometimes where you want to just flick over to having the material read to you. And in fact, I've quite often been known on a long train journey to read 3 or 4 pages. I'm tired. I'm on my way back home after a couple of days of meetings. I flick on to read aloud, and I have it spoken to me, and I can adjust the speed, and I can pause and stop whenever I want to. I think there are multiple areas where there are still significant challenges. You know, if you pick the name of a title of a book, and quite often we'll do this with my kids, it's not a case of saying everything is equally available as, you know, a printed book and as an audio book. And an example of that I want to draw attention here to is in the realm of children's books. So I quite often will download a book, and it's text, and I want to read it on an iPad, for example, or I want to read it on a Kindle. But actually, the way in which the text is formatted, it's been done in a comic style. Now, you're probably familiar with the comic style where you'll have, you know, cartoon characters, you'll have little bubbles or speech boxes. and everything is printed in uppercase, which makes it really difficult to read if you've got low vision. I just can't cope with all the text being in uppercase because I use letter recognition to aid my low vision and enable me to read and interrogate printed materials.
One of the accessibility problems when it comes to information is PDFs. I don't like PDFs. There is too many versions and variants of PDF, and most of them aren't accessible. So I can't easily access the information, and that makes me frustrated. So I prefer to use EPUB.
We have in Europe, the European Accessibility Act is coming through in June 25, and all publishers are have to produce accessible materials. I mean, this is, I think, good to do and easy to do in a way for leisure reading materials. But if it's come to more business-oriented materials, to mathematic equations, to tables and these kind of things, to school materials are used at the university. So at the moment, we do not have really so much accessible ebooks in this professional field. And I think this is a challenge for the publishers. If we think about pictures, description of pictures, if we think about mathematical equations or how to have a correct table created in a book that have to be accessible, there are challenges, but the technology is there to produce us in this way. And we as a blind person community, so we are really looking forward and eager to have more access to these high quality materials, and we need them to have full access to books in the future.
A thing we've been talking about for ages is born accessible, which means that we as a community or I as a disabled person want to be able to access the book exactly at the same time as everybody else.
So I'd love to see more developments in the space of take the content and employ the ultimate customization, make it work in the best way possible for an individual, because reading is at the heart of so much that we do. And it's a pleasure that everybody should enjoy to the max.
In the last, let's say, 5 years, I had the pleasure to work together with the German Association of Publishers, so-called Börsenverein. And so we have really close work together, had a working group. We call it as a task force with a lot of working groups inside, where we as an expert for accessibility sitting together with the publishing experts and the booksellers experts to motivate the publishing industry, to sensitize them, and to make materials accessible so that they can learn and that they understand what is in need and what are the advantages and the challenges of accessibility. And it was really a pleasure for me to work with them the last years together. I see that the publishing world is open for it. I see also there are challenges they have to face, and I have a full understanding that we can do it. Accessibility is for me a step-by-step program. But if you start moving in this direction, you have access, you can have success, and you will have more happy users like me who have access in the future. We are looking really forward to new results and to closely cooperation in the future to make the world better accessible than the world is at the moment.
Well, thank you, Thomas, Robin, and Joachim. What a great series of explanations and insights about the personal impacts of accessible reading. Well, our presenters have covered a lot of ground. We'll now move into the Q&A section of the webinar. It's actually a really busy week, and Thomas was unable to join us, but we're delighted that George Kirscher could step in to field questions. George, say hello.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Great. And in a mobile internet connectivity test, Robin is joining us from a high-speed train. Robin, can we just check that we can hear you?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear, Richard.
Great. Let's keep our fingers crossed that that connection stays there. And Joachim, very pleased to have you with us as well. Say hi, Joachim.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Great. Okay, so if anyone attending the webinar has questions for George, Joachim, or Robin, you can use the Q&A button in Zoom to submit these, and we'll cover as many as possible. And we'll start with one for you, George. Well, we heard that people who access books with a screen reader could be using a smartphone, they could be using a tablet, or indeed a laptop or desktop computer. Which of these kinds of devices do you use, and for what types of content, and why do you make those decisions, George?
So I primarily use a Windows machine um, and my iPhone, and I switch between the two of them depending more or less on the content. When I'm listening to a human narrated audiobook, it's almost always on my iPhone. Um, it's a great reading experience. Pause, easily rewind and re-listen to something. It's all very straightforward. For more complicated materials, I prefer the computer, and I use a great reading system for EPUB content. It's called Thorium. It's freely available. It's on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and it provides a great reading experience. I have complete control. I can use the navigation features of the table of contents and go to page. And when I'm inside a chapter, I can navigate by headings and easily read the tables. So for sophisticated content, educational materials, my recommendation is the Windows machine. I can pull up a Word file, take notes. I can copy things from the book and move it into the word processor. Having said that, I know that students who are much younger and the smartphone is almost integrated into their body, they just love to do everything on the smartphone. And happily, many of the apps that are out there allow them to do a lot of the same things you can do on a computer. So it really is personal preference, but learning how to use those reading systems effectively, I think, is very important.
Yeah, that's very clear. And of course, some folk use like a little keyboard together with their smartphone, don't they, to help with making notes and those kinds of things too. Thanks,
Yep.
that's very clear.
And then, as we've heard, some people will use the refreshable braille display attached either to their computer or their phone, and many people will move the digital book directly to their refreshable braille device, their e-reader, and have a whole collection of uh, titles that they're interested in reading. And they're just using this um, chocolate box size device with like 20 or 40 uh, braille cells, and they just move very quickly. They love it.
Yeah, great. All right, Joachim, we'll come to you. So, when you were talking earlier, you were describing the features that are important for your needs. You mentioned graphic descriptions in the context of text to speech or read aloud. Could you explain that? I wasn't sure that was entirely clear to everyone.
Okay. It's much like for blind and low vision people. I also need some kind of descriptions sometimes on graphics and pictures and stuff, just to get the gist of it, so to say.
Great. So you're using the same alt text that's been placed there with someone who's using a screen reader, and you're making use of that with Read Aloud to help you better get access to that content. Did I get that right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Great, perfect. All right, and I have another question for you. You mentioned that for people with physical impairments, some people with physical impairments, they may have difficulty holding their head or managing a print book. Could you explain a little bit more about how a digital book is important for folk with those kinds of conditions?
Yeah, I can try. Um, if you have those kind of conditions, it might be easier to use electronic book or ebook because you can get read aloud and you can use the device that is configured to work with your needs, kind of. So whatever you need, you can read in the device that is configured to work best for you.
Great, without having to deal with the kind of physical weight and the page turning of a
Yeah,
print book.
because you can have
Got
a
it.
whole library in a little device that weighs a few 100 grams, and you can have
Yeah.
yeah, the whole National Library there,
Okay.
or the
Great.
entire Global Book Service library.
Okay, great. All right, let's see how that connectivity is going, Robin. You were telling us a little bit about how you adjust the text on a smaller screen. And we lost you a bit there. So could you pick up from there? We'll see how this works.
Absolutely. Yeah. So often, Richard, is a combination of brightness, but also then the text in the background. Sometimes, for example, using maybe a sepia background and adjusting the brightness down. Reading outdoors, maybe if you want to go and sit outside somewhere or on holiday, the e-reader, in my case, a Kindle, Paperwhite, would be the device that I would use if I was reading through a long book. And that would be a nice, comfortable way to read, minimal eye strain, something battery lasts a very long time for. So you don't really have any battery anxiety with e-ink devices at all. So I love to mix it up. I love to mix the glasses, listening to books on there, but also reading from my Pixel, reading from the Kindle. Occasionally, I might be reading from a Windows device, but it's probably less likely in my case. So I'm a big fan of mobile computing, and you've got to pair it with a pair of earbuds that give you maximum flexibility.
Great. Well, you're living the dream of your mobile computing as you whisk your way through, I don't know where you are now, Northern England somewhere. Okay, so next question comes in
Northeast,
from
well done,
Bill.
just north of Newcastle.
Okay, great. Now, George and Joachim, you both talked about text to speech. You talked about it too, Robin. Bill asked the question about the importance of having languages properly tagged, not the primary language so much, but words and phrases in other languages, possibly even in other scripts. In your experience, does this work well, and how often is this done in a satisfactory manner? George, can you take this first?
So when a passage is marked with in a different language, the way I've got my machine set up is it will automatically switch to reading in that language. It actually changed the voice to a German or French, and it will read it in French. Um, that is very useful um, for
Hmm.
certain kinds of content. Um, and it's great when it's properly marked up. And we do a lot of testing at the DAISY Consortium of reading systems, and this is one of those fundamental things that we test for, that that a reading system combined with a screen reader will properly switch between the languages. So it's real important for certain types of content. Obviously, your um, straight English content or whatever language you're reading in, it's not so important. But when you're working in an environment where the book is intended to be switching between two languages, that's super important.
Yeah. Well, Joachim, You're joining us on a webinar in a language that isn't your first language. I'm guessing you read books in multiple languages, and yet you don't use a screen reader, you use text to speech. So, is this important to you? And does this work in practice for you currently?
It's very important, and I used the same setup as George in that sense that the system switches the read aloud text to speech engine or voice, should I say, dependent on what's marked up.
Okay.
And it works fine if it's properly done. It has to be done.
And I
by
think
the
part of Bill's question was, is it commonly done, rarely done, or most usually done and rarely it isn't there? What's your experience in practice?
It's sometimes it's done.
Okay. All right.
Not as often as I would like, but it's done.
Okay. Well, with the
I
coming
read in I
legislation
read in
and
I read in four languages, so it's a bit. I I really would prefer if it was switched when there is a new language coming up.
yeah, great. Well, with the awareness driven by the legislation and the great work that publishers and vendors are doing, hopefully you'll get more and more books that are doing that automatic switching.
Yeah, I hope
Um,
so.
Yeah, yeah. So the next question comes from Kirsi, and Kirsi says that the coming legislation requires that publishers produce metadata on the accessibility features of ebooks. For you as consumers, which are the accessibility features most important to you? Uh, what kind of accessibility metadata would you like to have presented to you in, say, an online bookstore or in a library catalog? What's super critical? So let's start with you, Joachim. What would you like to see so that will give you confidence or when you find that book on the catalog?
If it's read aloud, of course,
Okay.
and if it's audio and text synchronized, um, which means that the text is included in the book, of course. So the read aloud is synchronized with the text, preferably.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it gets
Good.
confusing.
Yeah,
And
sure.
then of course, I want to know if there is proper descriptions, like uh, graphic and picture descriptions.
Great. Super. Coming to you then, Robin. When you're looking at a catalog, are there things that you want to check before you download that book to know that it'll work for you as a person with low vision?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's about the completeness of the reading experience. So, I want to have a reading experience that's customizable and that's engaging in the same way as it is looking at it in print, for example. So, how can it be made as customized as possible? Absolutely, everything that's been said in terms of synchronized text and audio, critical. I think maybe on the language question, a takeaway for all of us is to just go and try that. I've not done it for a little while. Just try the language switching. How well does it work? You've really got me thinking.
Yeah, great. And for you, George, what is it as an end user, as a buyer of books or a borrower of books? What do you want to see kind of first in that explanation about the metadata?
Well, what I hear from most people, first and foremost, is they want to be able to make the visual adjustments. So many people have to increase the size of the font that I think that's just one of those fundamental things. And then, of course, as a blind user, I want to make sure that I'm going to be able to consume all of the content, that it's going to support non-visual reading and text to speech. And we have so many of these laws that are pointing to WCAG 2.1 AA. I want to know if this book really does conform to existing standards. Those would be the top three things in my mind. And of course, if it's technical content, I want to make sure that it's got support for like math and MathML, that there are alternative text, and hopefully it's a real complex uh, image of a flow chart or something, that there's an extended description, a long description that properly describes this so I could, for completeness. So I want to be able to consume the book completely, just like a sighted person would.
Great. Now we've got about 10 minutes to go. We've got a number of questions lined up. You're going to need to jump in quick if you have a question for our panelists here. The next question is from Margaret. Margaret's asking about your experience of reading titles that have tables in them. And the question is around whether the kind of the summary of the table, a summary explanation of the table, is important in addition to being able to navigate the individual data points. So, your thoughts on that as an end user? Do you prefer to just tangle with the table and figure that out, or is your preference to have some kind of description without you having to tangle with the table piece? So maybe George, would you speak to that?
Well, I like to have an overview of what this thing is about, and um, and that's always really helpful. So to have a perspective of the overview, um,
Hmm.
that is written for anybody, not specifically for a blind person, because when I go into the table, my screen reader tells me automatically how many rows and columns there are, and I can traverse the column headings easily. That's the first thing I do to find out what the column headings are. So the screen reader gives the detailed information about the table, but having a perspective of what the table is covering here is very helpful to get.
Right. So it might not say this table has, 15 rows and 6 columns, but it might say something like the table shows the increase in river levels from January to showing that this is going up each year or something like that. That more of an explanation of the meaning. Did I get that right?
You got it absolutely right. That kind of overview, what is this table about, and do I want to spend time on it? And should I look at it in detail, cell by cell? So that's what the overview gives you.
Super. Okay, so the next question is for you, Joachim. You mentioned that you prefer Daisy and EPUB books with synchronized audio and text. The
Yeah.
question is, what level of synchronizing is good for you? Is it at word level, sentence level? How does that work? So maybe you could explain to folk who aren't familiar what we're meaning by this synchronization thing, the highlighting.
Okay, I will try. Synchronized text and audio means that whatever word or sentence is read aloud is supposed to be marked up. Oftentimes, when we use text-to-speech engines, they mark up, or they mark every word as they go along.
With a
And
highlight,
if
right?
highlight, sorry, highlight every word as they go along. If it's a human narrator, then it's often phrases or sentences that's highlighted. And I like them both,
Okay,
and I use them differently. But I'm more used to sentence or phrases, as we said in the olden days,
great.
and phrases. So I'm used to phrases being marked or being highlighted. And
Perfect.
another funny thing is that I also want to be able to change the highlighting color. So it's personal preference.
Okay, so to modify the colors so that you're not just given what the reading system offers you, you have the ability to switch that around. Got
Yeah,
it. And thank
and
you for explaining that so clearly. Robin, you talked about text to speech. I think you talked about the read aloud experience too. Do you use the highlighting, and do you have an answer for the question as to do you have phrase and sentence highlighting, or do you like every word to be highlighted as it reads?
Personally, I like every word to be highlighted as it's reading, but one of the things I'm really excited about is what multimodal AI can do here. So I think we're going to see some really cool stuff happening. I mean, imagine if I
hope
want
so.
to change the highlighting color, but I want to do it by voice rather than going into the settings. Perhaps I want to modify the background color also. So having, ultimate flexibility to go in and out of the reading experience.
Okay, I think we got the message there, which was about personalization is key. So, turning to the next question, we have one for you, George. So, in addition to dramatically broadening choice, one of the advantages of accessible ebooks is speed, that you're able to read a book like on the day of publication rather than waiting for a specialist organization to get hold of it. Is this something that you personally value? And do you have any kind of examples of where you've noticed that change yourself?
Um, this is absolutely a wonderful feature. For those of us who have grown up in the library serving the blind and waiting for a human narrated version, which can take take months and months and months, when there's a heartbreaking uh, publication out there, you want to be able to read it at really at the same time as everybody else. Several years ago, a novel was published uh, by Krakauer about the city I live in, and I just had to read it. So I went on this time I went on Apple Books. I downloaded it, purchased it, downloaded, and I was reading it like 6 hours after it came out, and everybody in town was talking about it. Um, and Fortunately, I was in the know. I could speak to every item that was covered in that book. So that was great and really important to um, be right there on the cutting edge and get all the information. Many times you're in a book club and they're wanting to read the latest novel, and having to wait 6 months to read that is um, difficult. So it's great to be able to buy the same book at the same time, at the same price as everybody else.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, look, we're coming to the end of our time today. Thank you again to Thomas, to Joachim, Robin, and George for being excellent guests in this webinar. And to remind you that in the treasure trove, that is the DAISY webinar archive, you'll find more than 30 hours of videos, articles, and links to resources related to accessible publishing. This webinar is the sixth event in our Countdown series, a 12-month program exploring all aspects of accessible publishing and reading, facilitating knowledge sharing and helping everyone involved to understand and prepare for the European Accessibility Act. We'll be taking a short break over Christmas and New Year, but we'll be returning on January the 22nd with 157 days to go for accessibility metadata. Metadata is a topic that everyday consumers easily overlook, but it provides the framework that enables the publishing industry to function. Crucially, it provides potential customers with information about the accessibility features and hazards of a publication and helps their decisions on whether a title will be usable by them. Accessibility metadata for digital publications is still a relatively new area, but it's part of the publishing ecosystem critical to successful implementation of the EAA and other accessibility legislation. So, this webinar will highlight the latest developments and best practices in accessibility metadata, showcasing how far we've come and discussing some of the challenges that remain. On February the 26th, with 122 days to go, we're looking at the essentials in your toolbox. Accessible digital publishing can be a complex topic, so thankfully a portfolio of tools and services are available to guide you on your accessible publishing journey, highlighting issues and providing confidence that your material will deliver the level of accessibility intended. So this webinar will guide you through the tools that everyone should be aware of to aid the successful production of accessible titles. And then with only 94 days to go, on March 26th, we're diving into the topic of accessible math and science in digital publications. Representing math and scientific information is often referred to as complex content, and for good reason. These can be challenging materials to make accessible in any format, and that includes within digital publications. This webinar will highlight the latest developments in math and science, content authoring and reading, making complex content more manageable and accessible to everyone. You can find out more information at daisy.org/webinars, where you can also sign up to the webinar announcement mailing list to learn about new topics as we add them. If you would like to suggest a subject, or if you'd like to share your perspective on the forthcoming European Accessibility Act, then please email us at webinars@daisy.org. Thank you so much for coming today. I hope you'll join us again next time. In the meantime, goodbye.